I thought I'd arrive early at the lawyer's office, but when my lawyer and I got there, Dave and his lawyer were already in the conference room. Seeing him with an attractive woman triggered my usual jealous reaction, making me feel somewhat inferior to him deep down. At 48, he was more handsome than at 20, tall and muscular, owning a successful business and leading the local chamber of commerce. I shuddered at the thought that if today didn't go well, I might never feel his comforting arms again. Dave barely acknowledged me as I followed my lawyer into the room. My face turned pale when the red-haired lawyer reached out to reassure him. I interpreted it as her wanting to quickly finish the meeting to pursue him. I knew from experience that she would enjoy it, as my husband was skilled and knew how to use his charm. Dave smiled at her but remained neutral when he looked at me. Frustrated by Dave's determination not to talk to me, I was forced to attend the meeting. While my lawyer chatted with the red-haired lawyer, I sat down. Dave took a folder from my large purse, opened it, and laid out the finished 2-page script. Seeing Dave smile faintly, I knew he was aware of my thorough preparation. He set up a laptop, plugged in speakers, and put a single sheet of paper next to it. Then, casually, he put his hands on the table and looked at me with a polite but insensitive face. No anger, no hate, no grief. I had prepared for this meeting for 3 days, knowing my script by heart. I used my knowledge of David Brown to appeal to his emotions. We gathered to discuss Mrs. Julianne Brown agreeing to sign a divorce petition if Dave listened to her for at least 1 hour. "If everyone is ready, I suggest the hour begins now," she said, turning the timer knob. It began to tick loudly, emphasizing the silence in the room. I was annoyed that Dave insisted on having lawyers present instead of a private meeting. I planned to share my feelings for the next 45 minutes before making Dave admit to something justifying my inappropriate behavior. It's awkward with just the two of us, even more humiliating in front of strangers. Well, no point in dwelling on the negatives. I had no choice. Glancing at my unnecessary notes, I crossed my fingers. Remembering my friend Sonia's advice, I cleared my throat. I expressed gratitude for Dave's willingness to meet with me today. I acknowledged my error and clarified that it wasn't related to his failure, but rather my own self-centeredness. I had spent days reflecting on this, hoping that Dave would appreciate my honesty. I believed he desired to forgive me, and my speech aimed to offer the justification he needed. Contemplating what might happen if the kids were at home, I considered playing the "Dave, you can't break up the family" card, confident it would succeed. Observing his reaction to my speech, I examined his face and was taken aback by his response. In the ensuing silence, Dave's expression remained neutral. He didn't even direct his gaze toward me. Methodically, he raised his pen and marked a check next to the first sentence in his notes. My first words almost completely confused me. I said exactly what he expected, shaking my confidence. In my arrogance, I forgot that not only had I come up with my argument based on 30 years of knowing him, but he had spent those 30 years looking back at me. I'm not ashamed to admit I was shocked. I emphasized the importance of sticking to the script, reiterating that the situation with Dave was a result of my own foolish and self-centered decisions. I conveyed the feelings of being lost, without children, feeling aged, unattractive, and worthless. I explained that I met Jason while collaborating on a church committee, describing him as sophisticated and a skilled seducer who knew precisely which buttons to press and when. He began acting like a friend, listening to my problems after church meetings last year when you were frequently away. But one day, after a church meeting, Jason suggested going to a cafe, and unfortunately, I agreed. It all seemed innocent, and he appeared as a good friend, so I didn't realize he was adept at breaking through a woman's defenses. Well, from coffee shops, we progressed to restaurants where he complained about his wife. I know it's a cliché, but by then, I trusted him. The restaurants became increasingly upscale, and the gifts he gave me became more enjoyable. "Oh, Dave, you can't imagine how nice it is when a guy 15 years younger than you tries to win you over. But you'd be proud because 4 months ago, he asked me to sleep with him, and I declined. I should have refused to meet him after that when his intentions were clear, but by then, I had become somewhat reliant on the effect his compliments and attention had on my ego and confidence. I fell silent and sniffled, wiping my eyes with the finger I had previously rubbed on an onion piece in my pocket. It stung so much that I didn't dare rub my other eye. One teary eye should have been enough. I stopped, started again, faltered, and hesitated. Oh, honey, I'm so ashamed that I didn't break up with him. He took me to a restaurant and bought a $300 bottle of Grange, even though he himself doesn't drink wine. Instead of wasting it, I drank almost all of it. I'm pretty sure that's what he wanted. I was too nervous to resist him. When we left the restaurant, he offered to take me home, and I foolishly agreed. Once in the driveway, he leaned over and kissed me, but I was too drunk to stop him. You know how I get after a couple of glasses of wine. Then he started touching my chest. At this point, my logic was completely broken, and I remember just thinking that I should move him out of the driveway so the neighbors wouldn't see us. For the same reason, I opened the garage door and forced him to park inside. I cheated a little by admitting that even in the car, I thought Jason might be staying a while. And I certainly didn't want the neighbors to see a strange car in the driveway the next morning. But it was all a calculated risk on my part. I knew enough about men in general to understand that being betrayed was a major blow to a man's ego, and I wanted Dave to ensure that no one else ever found out about it. Well, except for 2 lawyers. Well, Jason got out of the car as the garage door was closing and started kissing me again. As I said, I had already drunk most of the bottle of Grange and was ripe for plucking. He grabbed my key and led me inside. I took him to one of the spare bedrooms, and I will be ashamed of this until the day I die. I let him do whatever he wanted with me. I'm so sorry, Dave. My only saving grace was that I was composed enough with him to get him to put on a safe. After Jason came, I think we both fell asleep. I because I was drunk, and he because he must have been tired after a 4 or 5 month chase. I know for sure I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't drunk and depressed when I woke up. And I definitely would have kicked him to the curb immediately. Instead, you entered the room and turned on the light. I have never been so ashamed in my life. The look of pain on your face just killed me. I realized how much misuse I caused to you and us with one simple mistake. With tears still flowing from one eye, I turned my pleading gaze to my husband. Having spent a lifetime together, I knew that I could read his expression like an open book and be able to judge how my request was going. Not true. His expression remained neutral. In fact, he didn't even look at me. Strange, but he was fiddling with the laptop in front of him. I thought he was writing notes until he clicked the link on his screen. A voice came from the speakers. My voice. Ugh, don't kiss me. You reek of beer. What about you, rotten grape breath? What? I had one lousy glass of white. The audio clip stopped and the room fell into a thunderous silence. I think that's how it was. The roaring sound in my head drowned out everything else. Yes, I felt embarrassed and humiliated when Dave walked in on me that night with Jason before lifting Jason by his hair and beating the crap out of his body. But that was insignificant compared to the fact that I had just been caught in a huge lie. This completely threw me off track. I was so confident that my script would work, my eyes darted around the room. Dave's lawyer smiled slightly. Mine looked slightly embarrassed. Dave just looked at me expectantly with that damn blank expression. Later. I will never understand why I didn't immediately realize what it all meant. What the heck? Dave had an audio recording of my meeting with Jason that night being wound up. It never occurred to me to follow the logic of this. Why does he need a voice recorder there if he didn't know in advance that he could record something? What else did we say? The silence stretched uncomfortably for a long time, and I looked at the cryptic shorthand of my notes and, looking back stupidly, plunged into the script I had prepared. I clung to him like a drowning man clings to debris. It was only once. It won't happen again. Nothing like that. Please believe me. I just wasn't strong enough to resist him. but I wasn't so out of control that I wouldn't force him to use a protection or let him take me on our bed. He wanted it, but I would never do that, no matter how drunk I was. We were in Megan's old room, right? Dave just looked at me sadly, and I didn't know what was worse, his sad face or his impassive one. He shook his head and turned to the computer. I felt, rather than heard him double-click the icon, and I cringed until I just like to watch how you lie in front of me, full of desire. It is very hot. Then, once it's finished, another double-click, and Jason's voice again. When can we have time in bed again in your clueless husband's bed? It was so cool. This time, Dave clicked and ended the clip, and then just looked at me silently, accusatory. What could I even say? Everything I claimed was debunked, not by Dave, but by my own words. Protection. It was a one-time drunken mistake, not getting closeness with my husband in our own bed. The whole thing crumbled as a lie in just 30 words. Stand, stand. I'm speechless. Though it was awkward, I looked at Dave for any clue. His neutral gaze revealed nothing. I noticed my lawyer checking her watch, making me focus on the ticking timer, realizing the 60 minutes I had to salvage my marriage were slipping away, and I admit, going terribly. I forced myself to suppress panic. Apologies for the lie, Dave, about it being the first time. I just didn't want to hurt you more than I already had. I thought if I could convince you it was a one-time thing, and for the exact reason I stated, you wouldn't be so offended. I stumbled back into silence. Should I now admit I dated Jason several times a week for over 6 months? The trouble was, I didn't know what Dave knew. He had recorded conversations, revealing the night he found us wasn't the first or only night. But what else did he know? Hiding the recorder where I usually did with Jason hinted at suspicion at least one more time. I just didn't know. However, I knew that if I was caught telling one more lie, it would all be over. Well, Juliana, it's time to be vague, avoid details, and stick to the facts. The truth is that Jason did seduce me, and it took a while. He has a thing for older women. It's true that being pursued by a man almost my kid's age gave me an ego boost. I admit it, I was weak. I thought about saying I used the master bed only once, the first time. It would be a lie, but put me in a better light. But not knowing how long Dave knew about my extramarital activities held me back. I decided to stay silent on this. However, I couldn't remain silent on everything, realizing I had limited time to rectify the situation. Unsure of the best course of action, I turned my attention to my notes. I discarded the initial points after being exposed and focused on words highlighted in capital letters. I conveyed that I never ceased to love and respect Dave, emphasizing that I gave him no less love than I always had. I explained that Jason was an additional dimension that didn't diminish anything from my love for Dave, but rather added an overflowing quality, if I could describe it that way. When I fell silent, Dave redirected his gaze to his laptop screen, furrowed his brow, and appeared momentarily confused. However, he eventually relaxed again. Listening to the recording, a continuation of the earlier soundtrack, I understood that Dave's frown indicated he was searching for an icon on the screen before realizing it was one of the open files. It would be better if he didn't grasp it, and he evidently started over. Going back to the beginning of the video, I revisited Jason's question about being closeness in our marital bed. Like the first time, I cringed, knowing my words once again condemned me with, "I already told you, never again, not after the last time." That night, Dave stepped out of the shower and inadvertently stepped on a large drop of white, for which I was grateful. Dave accepted my explanation about sneezing, attributing the drop to snot. Sinking lower into the seat, I anticipated the predictable words that would follow. Although I initially felt smug when I uttered them, that feeling dissipated. Distracting Dave by offering to clean his leg and doing it nicely diverted his attention. Commenting, "You have to admit, doll, that your husband sometimes acts like an ignorant idiot," I found discussing how we successfully evaded detection, such as when he had to hide in the closet when Dave came home early, insulting. Yes, Dave is clueless. Initially, I found it sweet that he trusted me so much. Now, he's just an ignorant fool. Sometimes, I wonder if we could have time in bed right here while he's in the room." The mocking tone made me realize I was rehashing a futile point. With these words and such a tone, I couldn't even convince myself I loved and respected my husband, let alone him. Again, confusion set in. Before this meeting, I convinced myself I loved and respected Dave. But after what I did and said, how is that possible? Steeped in the ticking, tense silence. After the final nail in my coffin, Dave turned to look at me. I couldn't look him in the face, so I turned to his lawyer. Such contempt on her face made me shudder. Any doubts that Dave was just another client to her vanished. I looked away from her and now looked at my lawyer. She, too, wasn't quick enough to hide her disdain. Here I am, fighting for my future, surrounded by people who think I'm something they stepped into at the dog park, and one of them should be on my side. My confidence dissipated like dew in the midday sun, and my self-esteem quickly followed suit. Perhaps that's why I revisited my notes and chose to adopt an offensive stance. I conveyed to Dave that over the last 6 months, he had been paying me decreasing attention, taking me for granted, traveling for business more frequently, and seemingly distancing himself from me. All of this occurred simultaneously with the children leaving home, leaving me feeling lost. I expressed how he was never there when I needed him, failing to reassure me about my age and attractiveness or provide comfort in times of need. Pausing, I noticed Dave's eyes returning to his screen, and I cringed as his fingers danced, opening the selected file. It became apparent that Jason's words were from just after our second encounter, that fateful night shortly before Dave reached a breaking point. Jason spoke about our recent lack of bed life, expressing his desire for more frequent encounters. He mentioned a canceled trip and how I had requested him to limit Dave's diet. Jason explained that he only had the opportunity that night due to an urgent meeting Dave had to attend. He also expressed a wish for Dave to leave town more often. "Well, I want more," retorted an irritated Jason, to which the clip was once again interrupted. Ashamed, I lowered my eyes to the table, avoiding 3 judgmental glances, and recalled my emotional state during the last conversation. The truth was that the novelty of having a lover, even one as young and energetic as Jason, was beginning to wear on Jason, and my actions in betraying my husband had caused me to lose respect for Dave, and it was at least beginning to prick my conscience. Loss of respect more than anything else, I think, was the reason for my emotional distance from my husband. Even as I prepared for this meeting, fully intending to blame him for pulling away from me, I realized that it was a lie to allow myself to continue to betray him. I emotionally divorced Dave. Cutting him off in bed was an easy decision, simply because Dave's lovemaking was so different from Jason's impatience that it was impossible to confuse the two. This reinforced to me that what I was doing was very, very wrong. So I began to reject my husband's advances. Well, he pressed for a while, then he stopped. I suddenly realized that it should have been screaming for my attention months ago. Dave suddenly gave up his bed life around the same time he began working longer hours and going away more often. At the time, I thought he was also emotionally distancing himself from me. I closed my eyes, now completely confused about who was distancing himself from who. And then, something clicked. Dave must have known for a long time. That's why he knew he had to hide the recorder in Megan's room. Crap. My entire approach to this meeting was to minimize my crime, heal Dave's wounded pride, eat some humble thing, all to get my life back and the future I so desperately wanted. I thought I was calming a recently wounded bull. But if I was right about him knowing at least 2 weeks before he discovered Nate confronted me, then he was a lot more cunning than I thought, and I was wasting my time calling to his emotions. Stand. In short, I had no idea what to do. I'm much better when I plan than when I'm spontaneous. Hence, 2 pages of notes. But I had to do something. Time was running out. The ticking of the clock confirmed this. In desperation, I took my notes and began to look for hope. The pounding in my head made absorbing the words a very slow process. Nothing jumped out. Then I realized that the recordings were a red herring because the game had changed so much. If Dave knew I was leaving for a while, what was his state of mind? He, of course, was offended by my betrayal, but most of all, he was worried about my motivation. Wasn't I satisfied with the quantity and quality of his lovemaking? Do I find him boring and want to explore my kinky side? Did I love Jason? Was I really going to run away with him? I could correct these fears and doubts. I risked looking into those expressionless eyes, wondering if I should risk lying again. If only I could remember what else Jason and I talked about that fateful night. If only I could be sure that this was the only night David recorded. Of course, the sequence had to be suspect. Install recorders. Resist. He could not be sure of this for long. He just wasn't a good actor. I desperately wanted to convince him of the truth. I still loved and respected him. My desperate desire that he would not abandon me proved this. It was far beyond my fear of losing my very comfortable lifestyle. But how do I convince him that I respect him after we've all heard me call him and goofy in front of my lover? What's the point of trying to justify denigrating him to my lover as a soppy to my conscience and creating a common bond between Jason and me? Nothing that I could see. The same applied to love for him. If I had caught him deceiving me, the wild horses would not have been able to draw the conclusion out of me that he still loved me. So convincing him that I love and respect him will take time. I won time by convincing him not to insist that I immediately sign the divorce papers. But how long does that damn timer keep ticking to convince him of this? One thing was for sure, my next few sentences were going to score points. Lots of points. Summoning my courage, I directed my gaze across the table at Dave. I conveyed to him that I understood he perceived a loss of my love and respect, reassuring him that it was not the case. I affirmed my love for him and our life together, expressing a sincere desire to spend the remainder of my days solely with him. I acknowledged the gravity of my actions, admitting that Jason was a distraction and that I didn't love him. Furthermore, I assured Dave that running away with Jason was never my intention. I admitted the wrongdoing of my actions, particularly in response to Jason's proposal to limit our closeness. Reflecting on the situation, I confessed that I didn't know why I went through with it, especially after convincing myself that I was merely providing Jason with an excess that Dave couldn't handle. I highlighted that Jason lacked the stamina and experience that Dave possessed, and my actions were driven solely by lust and selfishness. Although the physical aspect brought a temporary satisfaction, it was devoid of any genuine emotion. I clarified that I didn't engage in the same perversions with Jason that I had denied Dave throughout the years. Time seemed to slow down, mirroring the pace of those on the verge of pass away. The disintegration of my marriage unfolded in slow motion, with everyone around me moving at a normal speed. To my left, my lawyer expressed her disdain, tossing her pen on the table and turning to me. It was evident that, in this moment, I couldn't even pay someone to be on my side. Dave's lawyer leaned to the side to gain a better view of the laptop screen, revealing that Dave was not playing sound files, as I had assumed, but rather video clips. This realization intensified the gravity of the situation. Dave's wife grabbed his hand in a show of support, and though he wasn't looking at me, his reaction conveyed a profound hurt, as if the man meant to support him had betrayed him. I witnessed a fleeting expression of devastation on his face, and a single tear rolled down from the eye closest to me. I questioned whether he was truly suffering, or if he had steeled himself by fixating on the screen. Amidst the chaos, a few irrelevant facts registered in my mind. The recording was made at least 3 weeks before the collision, meaning Dave had been witnessing my betrayal for some time, enough to discern a pattern. Silence enveloped us as the speakers played, the heat that had once suffused the room now transforming into a sense of dirtiness, sloppiness, and tastelessness. I focused on the table, and my lawyer laid out the divorce papers before me. Helpless, I couldn't counter the vile behavior that Dave had uncovered. With unparalleled ease, he dismantled all my rationalizations, minimizations, and feeble attempts at reconciliation. It was over. Dave, acting as an orchestra conductor, didn't utter a word today. Instead, he indicated the section of the orchestra he wanted to play next, using his skills and talents to execute a silent symphony of separation. No, it wasn't Dave. I ascended the scaffold myself, blindfolded and with a noose in hand, kicking the lever. Dave simply erected the scaffold and departed. As soon as he played the last clip, he knew precisely what I was going to say, leaving me with no chance at redemption. And when I came up with my arguments based on my closeness knowledge of him after observing him for 3 decades, I had forgotten that he also looked at me for the same amount of time, looking back at me with her smart, penetrating eyes. The shame and humiliation were unbearable, and finally caused me to run away. Escape was what I needed. Running back to the house that was still my home, at least until Dave got the eviction notice. That was part of the agreement. An escape to children who I hope will never know and will continue to love me unconditionally. The only way to salvation lay through a receipt with the loss of most of my life. I took the pen, signed the 2 agreements, and threw it away in one fluid motion. I was surprised Dave's business wasn't worth more, but that's what my lawyer's assessment found. And of course, Dave had plenty of time to hide most of it. By that time, the last recording had thankfully ended, and the ticking silence returned. My lawyer took the signed papers, handing me a copy while placing the rest in her briefcase. She left the room, leaving me seated, frozen, torn between the desire to run and the wish to convey a positive message. I longed for an ember of hope, something to convince myself that there might be a chance to rekindle the flame someday, to let Dave know that I still cared about his well-being. The sharp sound of an alarm clock disrupted my thoughts, prompting me to stand up and deliver my positive phrase. The jackal, holding Dave's hand with both hands, urged him not to seek revenge on Jason, expressing her fear of never forgiving herself if he ended up in prison. Dave's response was another damning video, thankfully not featuring my voice, but that of another woman speaking in an almost shrill tone. She mentioned the consequences Jason would face if her brothers got to him first, identifying herself as Mrs. Jason. Initially, I had thought Jason's silence after the beating reflected fear on his part, but now I pondered that being divorced and penniless might be a fitting end for the scammer. The burden on my conscience grew heavier as I considered that he might die because he had been involved with me. As I prepared to leave, I couldn't bring myself to look Dave in the face. Whether he had his expressionless face, whether he was laughing or crying, it all pained me, a constant reminder of the misuse I had caused this good man. He had lost everything except my house and money, and suffered a tremendous emotional blow, all at my hands. I deserved every bit of his anger. Through tears, I managed to squeeze out a feeble, "Goodbye, dear," as I shuffled towards the door. My pathetic attempt to salvage my old life was discarded, akin to a plague beetle. Perhaps my daughter Megan would visit me while I drowned myself in oblivion, or if she wasn't available, then my son Joel. Just as I began to push the door, voices behind me caught my attention. Another damn recording. An excited young male voice accused, "Cheater!" A very familiar female voice intervened, asking, "Are you sure, Dad? I think I'll drink alone today.